Costa Rican activists who had volunteered to host them there. In the news, this image came up. The police had identified a so-called terrorism bunker. Inside the bunker, they found Molotov cocktails, electoral propaganda from the opposition, and a terrorism manual from the student movement. They had, for weeks, claimed that the Honduran student movement was planning to carry out terrorism activities to boycott the electoral process. So, what is the connection between those news and the Honduran students in Costa Rica? Well, the students were not in Costa Rica because of tourism, even though I assure you Central America has a lot to offer in terms of landscape and nature. These students were in exile because some weeks before, someone from within the Honduran army had informed a local human rights organization about a series of false positive operations that were going to be carried out. You see, the plan was very simple: to blame student activists for fake criminal activities and prevent them from taking the streets whenever the government announced the illegal re-election of who was president at that time. The news they were watching were just the first of a series of similar operations that would unfold in the following days. It looked like, after all, leaving the country had been the right decision. But why was the government focused on persecuting students? Well, for the past 2 years, that generation of student activists had led the biggest protests the country had seen since the military coup. They had succeeded in forcing the university's authorities, who were directly supported by the government, to reinstate a democratic student government. The reestablishment of a student democracy in Honduras' only public university had finally become a reality after more than a decade since its abolishment. They had achieved this through long strikes that lasted more than 10 months over a period of 2 years. The students had sacrificed a lot. They saw how their campus became militarized. Many of them were expelled. More than 100 of them were criminally persecuted, and dozens were arrested. Also, most of their leaders experienced death threats and other forms of intimidation. Still, they did not give up, and they won the support of most of civil society in Honduras, and also showed that it was possible to stand up for democracy. So if there was one public enemy number one at that time for those seeking to stay in power, that was clearly the student movement. That young generation that had raised the hopes of a democratic future in the country. And as those students watched the news, one of them had another concern roaming his mind. That student was thinking about how, in a couple of days, he was supposed to meet online with the representatives of the Norwegian embassy in Colombia. Why? It turns out that that student was undergoing, and I can actually quote his thoughts at that time, some kind of process to be selected into some kind of scholarship in a country he couldn't even point in the map. So he was weighing the opportunity to depart to a safe haven through a study scholarship versus living in the middle of such a critical moment for his country. 9 months later, that student would be landing in a rainy city called Bergen, with mixed feelings about leaving his country, but finally safe from the persecution he had endured for the past years. My name is Hector Ulloa, and the story you just heard, that student, that's me. In 2018, I came to Norway through the Students at Risk program. The story I shared with you right now is just a brief glimpse into how the life of a student activist can look under authoritarian rule. And I must acknowledge here that in the past years, I have come to know that my story is far from unique. In fact, for the last 10 years, approximately 145 students have gotten the opportunity to fulfill their education in Norway and receive the protection they so much needed through the Students at Risk program. Some of them have more extreme stories you will probably never get to hear. If you would have asked me in 2018 what I would be doing today, 6 years after coming to Norway, it would be crazy for me to even imagine I would be where I am right now. And Students at Risk is, of course, a big part of my life story. That is why I am extremely happy to have the opportunity to be your host on this special day. A day of celebration, a day to celebrate 10 years since the creation of Students at Risk, to discuss what we have achieved together, what we have learned from each other, and also to explore how we can strengthen our efforts to protect student activists around the globe. Before we dive into a series of very interesting panels and presentations we have prepared for you, I would like to first give the floor to 3 important people, all of which play a key role in sustaining and promoting Students at Risk. First, we'll begin with some words from our host, Svein Stølen, Rector of the University of Oslo. Then we will hear from the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Espen Barth Eide, followed by Director Sveinung Skule from the Norwegian Directorate for Higher Education and Skills. Welcome, and please give each one of them also a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Hector, for sharing your story, setting the scene. I think it was an excellent start for the conference. Can you hear me loud and clear? Yeah? Yep, that's good. So, Minister, ambassadors, student at risk, dear friends, it's a great honor to be allowed to welcome you to Domus Biblioteka here today to this 10-year anniversary of the Student at Risk program. And I must say I'm deeply impressed by this program, established on the initiative of the Norwegian Students and Academics International Assistance Fund, SIO, and the National Union of Students in Norway, NSO. So in part, I think we have an anniversary here today, but to some extent, we're also celebrating student engagement and student solidarity here today, and that's important. Today's program presents status, looks back in time, but importantly, also looks into the future, of course. Timely and important. We live in turbulent times. It's only to put on the radio, and it's quite challenging times, of course, with armed conflicts and wars, some that receives huge attention in Norway, others that are less visible to us, but still of huge importance. We also see that academic freedom and institutional autonomy are under pressure in many countries, also in our part of the world. Against this backdrop, the Student at Risk program is more important than ever, and I'm really, really glad to see all of you here today. As you all know, the program is funded by the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and administrated by the Norwegian Directorate for Higher Education and Skills. And we are looking forward to hear from our Minister of Foreign Affairs and from the Director of HKDIR in a moment. From my point of view, as a rector of the University of Oslo, this is, needless to say, an extremely important initiative. It is to some extent a part of our international solidarity portfolio at the University of Oslo. Student of Risk is complementary to the Scholars of Risk program. We had 8 STAR students last fall at the University of Oslo, and we now have 6 STAR academics. And we also recently have taken the initiative to create the Global University Academy, an alliance where 16 universities from 3 continents come together to pool contribution and work with local partners to enable access to higher education for refugees, displaced learners and their local communities in or near zones of war and conflict. UNHCR, Flyktninghjelpen, the Norwegian Refugee Council, and SIH is also part of this initiative. Different initiatives, different target groups, but with international solidarity as motivation, and with a strong belief in academia as an open and sharing global community. We need to do what we can to facilitate for the development of free, open, and democratic societies. Our large strategic initiative, University of Oslo Democracy, is taken for a reason. Democracy is under pressure. Human rights are under pressure. And our work obviously has no geographic boundaries. We are also strong in our belief in students as a force in society. Students are critical and important voices in the struggle for human rights. And University of Oslo is proud to be challenged by students and proud to be working together with students. So once again, welcome to Domus Biblioteka, and I really look forward to this seminar here today. So welcome.
Rector, students, everybody, thank you very much for welcoming me here. And I have to say I'm really proud to be here today because I was at a similar event some actually 11 years ago when I was also foreign minister and we launched the program. Which is 10 years because it took some months to set it up, but that was in 2013. So I have a strong affiliation with this program. And in the room is Gry Larsen. Where are you, Gry? There you are, on first bench. She was my state secretary. And the short history is that SIH, the Students and Academics International Assistance Fund, and the Norwegian Student Association, and I think the people who ran them then was Olav Magnusson Rydje and Anja Bakken Riise, but representing many, of course. They came first to Gry, to the Foreign Ministry, to the State Secretary, and explained this idea, and she became very enthusiastic about it. Not everybody in the ministry were as enthusiastic at Gry, but that happens. But that's why we have politicians. And she then very quickly convinced me, and then I got equally enthusiastic. And we sat down to discuss what this could be in practice, what it was not. And the idea was born and launched. So it grew out of the student movement, the student organization. It was their idea, not ours. But we were very happy to come with a little detail, which is money and funding, and also the international support that we could give. Also, of course, putting our global organization of our embassies to the service of this initiative. So it's a really worthwhile initiative, and it's really good to celebrate its first 10 years. It's the first of many decades, of course, of this program, because the problem that it addresses is not going away anytime soon. And Rector said, Sturlen said it very well. I just landed from 10 days in North America, and most of the time was at UNGA, the UN General Assembly, and exactly the topics of human rights under pressure, actually also truth under pressure, and critical thinking under pressure was very much also on the agenda there. And if we want to foster modern democratic pluralistic societies, there is no better place to start than the universities and the educational sectors, because they are defenders of facts, meaning that through science you can identify that certain things are more true than others, and some allegations are simply can be falsified, but also, of course, the critical thinking. And in so many societies, very different societies all around the globe, we're seeing that when authoritarianism sets in, or populists are defining the agenda, or when rulers are not necessarily anti-democratic, but the rule of the majority without any tolerance for alternative views, then academic institutions, students are typically the voices that sometimes stand up. And that's a very worthwhile thing and worth defending. Most of that, of course, happens in the society where they live. But there are times where that means that leading people, student leaders, student activists, people who are speaking up are coming under individual threat. And the program, hence, we're very happy to support so far 146, I believe, people who have been through this, including those who are currently on it. So very happy to support them as individuals. But actually, it's much more than these as individuals. It's what they represent. Also, the space that the existence of such a program can also inspire people to take somewhat more risk, because somebody can see them, there's somebody in other countries who recognize their existence, and if things go really difficult, who also can provide continued education Sometimes we might actually have saved some lives, but at least we definitely have saved people's educational careers. And looking into the people, we know about some of these people, and we actually, for good reason, do not necessarily identify in detail what they do. But in general terms, some have become leading journalists, some have continued to be in the organizational sectors, some have been able simply to complete their studies, their PhDs, and so on. Some are here, but we very much value what I think we have collectively achieved, and why this is so important. Some historical examples of student movements changing the world. I think the historically most famous one is the 1968 movement in Paris, which of course became quite global and led both to major change in France, but through that in Europe. In America, the end of the Vietnam War was not necessarily, did not necessarily happen at the battlefield, but at American universities, actually changing the mind of Americans there. A very famous and dramatic revolt was, of course, the students standing up for democracy in Beijing in 1989, with for many a tragic result, but many others came and continued their studies in other countries. And the most recent one is the major changes that we've seen in Bangladesh, where only months ago we saw a major movement where students and student leaders were very central to what happened, and the fact that we now have a transitional President Prime Minister Mohamed Yunus, whom I actually met or saw now in New York, who is not there to stay, but in order to take the country forward into a new generation, also is very much because of students. And there are many, many other examples. I could mention Belarus, Russia itself, and so many places. And of course, our thoughts are very much with the people in Gaza and in the Middle East, and we also have, somewhat separate from this program, but we also have a number of people working with the University of Oslo who are now continuing their medical studies. That's a slightly different thing because it was simply impossible to continue in Gaza, and they are not here. So remembering as a university and as student movements, as universities, because it's all the universities, as student organizations at SIH, that what we strive to foster in our societies is very similar to what people do in other countries, and to look across is good. So if I may say so, Gry, you will be in the program later, but on behalf of that political leadership, the current political leadership congratulates ourselves for what we did, but also very much the initiators. And I'm very happy to see that NSO and SAH and the universities remain very committed to this cause, and I look forward to following the following presentations. Thank you.
Minister, Rector, dear distinguished guests, my name is Sveinung Skule. I am the Director General for the Norwegian Directorate for Higher Education and Skills. And a warm welcome to all of you to this 10-year anniversary for the Students at Risk program. It's a great honor to be here today, together with stakeholders, together with supporters, to celebrate this unique program. Our directorate is the executive agency for the Ministry of Education and Research, and our mission is to enhance and mobilize people's education and skills. We work to make high-quality education, learning and career guidance available and accessible to everyone. And this is also what the Students at Risk program is all about. It's about making education available, but to a very specific group of students. Originating, as we heard, as a student-led initiative, the program remains one of the few programs specifically supporting student human rights defenders. Students who have been prevented from completing higher education in their own country because of their unwavering commitment to human rights and because of their dedication to their local communities. The program vividly illustrates the empowering nature of education. The Students at Risk program holds great value, not only for the students, but also for our society, as we have heard already. 10 years ago, the Directorate was delegated the task of administering the Students at Risk program, and since then, as we've heard now, 146 student human rights defenders have been awarded a Students at Risk scholarship. This has given them a chance to complete their degrees. And we've already heard one example of what that entails. Some other examples. A female student from South Sudan, after graduating from the program, she went back home. There she founded an organization to help young mothers. And in addition, she continues to fight against female genital mutilation. Another example, a male student from Kyrgyzstan. He was met with death threats in his home country when fighting for LGBTQIA rights. Unfortunately, the risk of returning home is too high for him. He has graduated and is now continuing his battle from a safe place in Europe. Just like these students, we follow each and every student who receives the scholarship, from their nomination until they eventually arrive to Norway, and all the way until they graduate. Our aim is for all of them to succeed. We will continue to do this work and further develop the program, as the Minister now has promised, because the program has developed and changed a lot over the past decade. Developing the program means, among other things, an increasingly strong focus on safety and data protection of the candidates and the students. And internal procedures, internal development is one thing. Importantly, we also strive to develop and build stronger relations externally. For instance, with actors that are establishing similar initiatives abroad, some of them present here today. We would not have been able to run this program without the close cooperation and commitment from a number of key actors. And I would like to take this opportunity to give a heartfelt thank to the students' organizations, of course, to the human rights agencies and to the embassies. All of them continue to identify candidates for the program from all over the world. I also want to thank the immigration authorities for giving STAR students a special concern during their application process. And of course, I want to thank the universities and university colleges that provide the education itself, the institutions and academic communities and lecturers that welcome the STAR students, that teach our students and that support them during their bachelor and master studies. Their efforts are, of course, invaluable. Running a program like this requires a certain amount of flexibility, a certain amount of ability to think on one's feet, to find good solutions all along the way for the students. So, without your good contribution and cooperation, it would not be possible to manage the program with the level of quality and service which is required. So, I wish you all a good celebration today and look forward to further collaboration. So, thank you.
Our first keynote speaker today is Mary Lawlor, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. Ms. Lawlor will address the situation for young human rights defenders and the need for relevant protection mechanisms. Unfortunately, Ms. Lawlor could not join us physically today, but she has asked us to share her apologies with all of you and has been kind enough to record her intervention for us to see. However, we are lucky to have with us Ed O'Donovan, who is the Senior Advisor to the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. So after Ms. Lawlor's video, we'll have a short intervention by Ed, and we will then open the floor for a Q&A session. So please make sure to prepare your questions as you listen to them.
Foreign Minister friends, thank you very much for the invitation to join you to mark 10 years of the Student at Risk programme. I'm very sorry that I can't be with you in person. In many ways, this programme, focusing specifically on student human rights defenders, was ahead of its time. And as we have seen over the past decade, the need for such support has only increased. In preparing my report on youth human rights defenders, which I presented at the Human Rights Council earlier this year, I spoke with scores of student activists from around the world. They are the lifeblood of so many movements to preserve or demand human rights and democracy, to seek accountability, and to reject racism, prejudice, or inequality. And we have seen how powerful they can be, from the ouster of the repressive government in Bangladesh during the summer, to the pressure placed on universities to divest from companies that do business in the occupied Palestinian territory in contravention of international law. Even in authoritarian countries, universities can be found where the orthodoxy is challenged and where students are not willing to settle for the status quo, where freedoms of belief, association and assembly are outlawed. The promotion of human rights becomes a radical act. Maintaining an outside line to such students is vital to keeping alive the hope that they will prevail. And it is one of the reasons why the Students at Risk programme is so important. It helps nurture that hope. I am aware, for instance, that last year the Foreign Minister funded a small number of student human rights defenders from Russia to participate in a Student at Risk programme here in what is a very welcome initiative, at a time when the Russian government, domestically and internationally, is trying to undermine and delegitimize internationally recognized human rights at every step. When student defenders exercise the right to defend human rights, they often do so through peaceful protests, sit-ins, teach-ins, mobilizations, and advocacy campaigns. But they also do so through their university training to assist others. From medical students attending to wounded protesters in Nicaragua and defending their right to life, to student teachers in Myanmar, providing schooling to children in schools run by the civil disobedience movement in the country and promoting the right to education. This work is legitimate, is valuable, is under-supported, and is risky. In the example above from Nicaragua, those medical students were expelled from their universities and even prevented from receiving their study transcripts that would enable them to continue their studies abroad. In Myanmar, we know dozens of student teachers and children have died in airstrikes which deliberately target areas where the civil disobedience movement is situated. And in Bangladesh, students were detained, tortured, and many killed in the weeks of protest around the quota reform movement. While some of these examples are extreme, there are student human rights defenders in every region of the world who face sanction for their activities. These can commonly include suspension, cutting of scholarships, criminal charges, social isolation, or severe parental pressure. When they face these challenges, most are at a relatively young age. Most have not been incorporated into the wider human rights community in their countries or internationally, and there are few dedicated avenues of support for them. In spite of this, and because of this, it is not surprising that many give up on their human rights activism before they have had the opportunity to benefit from the support structures that do exist for human rights defenders more generally. Given all this, the Students at Risk programme plays a vital role. It offers dedicated support to students at risk because of their human rights work. There are few other programmes that do this. It provides an encouraging environment for them to reflect on their work and to meet other like-minded students, and it facilitates introductions to the wider human rights ecosystem. All of this is crucially important in helping them to stay the course with their defence of human rights. And I must recognise the Norwegian government support for the Student at Risk programme, including through the granting of visas to student offenders to allow them to come to Norway. With the success of this programme and the recently launched Oslo Breathing Space City for human rights defenders at risk, I would like to stress once again the role that temporary relocation plays in the life of a human rights defender. Knowing that these options exist and knowing that there is a straightforward process to apply if needed can mean that defenders have a fallback option if the risks they face at home become too grave or if they are reaching burnout. This can provide great comfort and also help them to return to their home countries with a reinvigorated spirit. While the Student at Risk programme and the Breathing Space initiatives are very welcome, the number of human rights defenders who can benefit from them are understandably quite limited. As one of the most prominent voices internationally on the protection of human rights defenders, I would urge the Norwegian government, again, because I've done it for many years, to treat with greater flexibility visa applications for temporary stays that come from human rights defenders at risk. This could mean the introduction of a human rights defender-specific visa stream, as a number of other countries have done, or simply giving enough latitude to embassies and consulates to assess an applicant's human rights defender status and the risks they face when considering their application. The EU itself has recently made amendments to its visa code handbook, which will allow member states to do just this. Let me finish by returning to the Student at Risk programme and once again congratulate all involved on its success. Given the lack of protection support for student offenders at risk, I think there would be great value in Norway further sharing its experiences with other like-minded states and encouraging them to put in place similar programmes. At a time when politicians all over the world are erecting barriers and the principle of universality risks being left on the outside, inviting students who promote and protect the universality of rights to Norway can both help those barriers seem less daunting and demonstrate the confidence Norway has in universal values. Thank you very much.
Let's now welcome Ed O'Donovan on stage.
Afternoon, everyone. That was my boss. She's smaller in real life, but no less scary at times when it comes to human rights defender protection. And it's an issue that she is very passionate about and has dedicated nearly 50 years of her life to working in human rights and working to try to secure protection and support for human rights defenders. And as our good friends in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs know all too well, she often keeps returning to plug governments who support the protection of human rights defenders to do more all the time. Mary does pass on her regrets that she can't be here today. She had a family medical situation which prevents her from travelling. She had hoped to come here. But in her absence, I'm just going to say a few words about the mandate and how it works, and then happy to answer any questions that you may have. But firstly, maybe just let me say how nice it is to be back in the university in Oslo. Since Mary took up the mandate in 2020, in 2021 we entered into an agreement with the Norwegian Centre for Human Rights here in the university, whereby they would provide interns to the mandate to work remotely to support the work of the mandate over the course of the summer months. So we've had 4 interns from the university so far, and it's been really great. We've had a project where one of the interns, Devika, categorised success stories of human rights defenders that we had recorded through our meetings with them and turned it into a very usable, accessible database, and that helped inform Mary's report to the Human Rights Council last year on successes of human rights defenders. We had another student, Mina, who did some really great background research on Vietnam, on the context for human rights defenders there, and what advocacy buttons we should or could be pushing in relation to long-term imprisonment of defenders. And this year we've had Emmanuel working on looking at past instances of the COP climate summits and documenting the aggression and repression of human rights defenders in the run-up to those climate summits. And we've had another student who's been working on briefing papers for cases that we have taken up on companies that the Norwegian Oil Fund has investments in, to basically draw more attention to the fact that there are allegations that human rights defenders are at risk in some of these risks linked to some of these companies, and we want to raise it with the oil fund, and we had a very successful meeting with them yesterday on the back of that. A last benefit is that I've somehow acquired a title of visiting scholar at the university, which has been great for my LinkedIn profile. The mandate, I should say, is also very fortunate to benefit from the support of the Norwegian government as a leader in this issue. And indeed, I was struck by the Foreign Minister's words last week about Norway's continued support for civil society organisations in Gaza and for UNRWA at a time when, as we know, many European governments pulled their funding a year ago or thereabouts, and in what was seen as a massive betrayal of trust by civil society partners and human rights defenders who we had spoken to. So that continued support for Norway is very welcome, and it's important for us to be able to say to human rights defenders to point to good examples where we see states taking principled stances at a time when universality is very much under attack. A couple of words on the function of the mandate itself. The Special Rapporteur is appointed by the UN Human Rights Council for 2 3-year terms. So Mary was appointed in 2020. Her term will expire in 2026. The main vehicle for interaction with states are formal letters that she sends where allegations of violations against human rights defenders are put to the relevant government or to the non-state actor concerned. And then the government responds sometimes, and then a dialogue can be opened with the government and the Special Rapporteur. All of this is designed to promote the implementation of the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders and to improve protection for human rights defenders around the world. In addition to that, she has official country visits which she can do, whereby she assesses the situation for human rights defenders in a particular country. The tricky thing about those is that your visit request has to be accepted by the government concerned. So it's sometimes the case where it's most needed, you're never actually going to get a visit. But last year she was in Algeria and Georgia. This year she's been to Brazil, and the previous year she was in Greece and Tajikistan. These are important ways to express solidarity with human rights defenders in the country, and also work with certain parts of within governments who would be more open or responsive to the issue of human rights defenders and improving civil society space. She does 2 reports per year, one to the Human Rights Council and one to the General Assembly. She'll be in New York in 2 weeks' time to present her upcoming report to the General Assembly, which is on the contributions that human rights defenders make to the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. In addition to that, she has turned to using social media quite a lot to try to respond to the urgency of requests with which we're often greeted with. There's a real disconnect in this formal letter system, which I spoke about, and the reality of the urgency that human rights defenders face when they're at risk or when they are, about to be attacked or imprisoned. These little, I suppose, things she can do to raise the visibility and draw attention to the case can be very effective, and we have seen evidence of how this can help the person at risk. And then just a last couple of things on the policy work, as she made not so subtle reference to. She's been working very much on temporary relocation visa schemes for human rights defenders. We've had meetings with various governments, ministries of justice and foreign affairs in different countries in Europe, really urging them to adopt such schemes. And the reason for that is because it's the most frequently cited response when human rights defenders meet her and tell her what they need to improve their security and protection, what we could assist with when it would come to making their work safer. Another big policy area has been around human rights due diligence for business. There was a directive passed at EU level last year on human rights due diligence, which is going to ensure that businesses operating in or from the EU will be forced to carry out human rights due diligence, and we were trying to make sure that human rights defenders were included in that thinking and in that process, because, as we know, many defenders face risks in the context of business. Time is short, and that was very much a whistle-stop tour, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, or afterwards, if anyone would like to discuss anything in further detail, please do just grab me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ed. Now we're going to open the floor for questions. So the way we're going to do this is we have a microphone. It will be brought to your chair, and we're going to do a round of 2 questions each time. So if you have a question, I see one hand over there, so we'll start at the end, and then we're coming here.
Thank you, Ed. Ingeborg from the Norwegian Human Rights Fund. Both you and Mary mentioned the EU's new updated visa code. And Mary's advice to the Norwegian government was fairly clear, I think. Can you say a little bit more about how Norway, I assume taking on the changes in the EU visa code, because it's a Schengen country, would possibly make things easier for human rights defenders who need short-term visas?
Thank you. And now over here.
Well, many thanks to you, Ed and Mary, for a very erudite speech. Like what Mary has just said, she's a powerful voice and a very consequential leader in the human rights ecosystem and value chain. Have you utilized this platform to mobilize resources for a program like this? Because I think with more resources, the Student at Risk program can do more. Have you tried to mobilize other powerful actors to contribute towards this noble idea? Thank you.
Thank you. Ed.
Thanks, Ingeborg. In relation to your questions, so as Mary mentioned, the amendments to the Visa Code Handbook at EU level were introduced as of June of this year, and they're operational now. And these allow consular officers who are dealing with visa applications greater flexibility to consider someone's human rights work and the risks that they face when making a decision on whether or not to grant them a visa. And this has been something that there was quite a lot of lobbying on for the previous 3 or 4 years. And partially as a result of a seminar called under the Spanish presidency towards the end of last year, it was agreed that this greater flexibility would be given. The changes in the handbook itself are great. I mean, it means that there's a lot less need for bureaucracy and a lot more understanding given to the difficulties that a human rights defender may face in gathering together all of the necessary documentation, the financial material, everything like that, in order to make the application. And crucially, it allows the person processing the visa to consider the type of risks that they're facing. So we're quite hopeful with this. It would be great to see Norway following suit. I understand from a meeting with the Ministry of Justice yesterday that this is in train. So yeah, we'll be keeping a very close eye on that. And to your question about mobilising resources, I mean, I think the mandate is certainly very happy to attest to the value of such programmes. It doesn't have a fundraising element to it. It doesn't have the capacity, or shall we say, the mandate to raise money for other programmes. But what she can and does do is speak about good practice, protection mechanisms that work, And that's one of the reasons why she's here in Oslo today, is to pay tribute to the 10 years of students at risk. And as we did this morning with the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, urge Norway to consider to upscale this, but also to branch out with other states and speak with other governments, and drawing on their 10-year-long experience, encourage them to adopt similar programs.
Thank you, Ed. We have time for 2 more questions, so please raise your hand. There's one question here. One last question.
Thank you. Line Hegnar from SAI. I wondered, could you release a report on young human rights defenders? Could you say a little bit more about how you would follow up, and the mandate can follow up on the report on young human rights defenders? Thank you.
Thank you, Line. Do we have a last question? Yes, right here.
Thank you very much. I'm Camila Grosso from Brazil, the Coalition for Academic Freedom in the Americas. If you could speak a little bit as well about the collaboration of the mandate with other special rapporteurs. I'm just thinking, for instance, Farida has just launched a report on academic freedom, and I'm just wondering how this collaboration across the mandates work.
Okay. On the issue of young human rights defenders, last year, or this year, Mary produced a report to the Human Rights Council on this issue. I mean, follow-up is keeping them in the conversation. It's about ensuring that her messaging from now on, when she's talking about human rights defenders, includes reference to young human rights defenders, and encouraging governments, when she's in dialogue with them, to keep them under consideration when they're talking about human rights defenders more generally, and when they're planning their human rights programs. We continue to have quite a lot of interaction with those who we spoke to in the run-up to the report, and they continue to send us cases. A big element of this is introducing a younger generation of defenders to the maze of the UN system and encouraging them to make use of it and trying to persuade them why it's worth their while. Because it can seem very remote and abstract to people, especially at the beginning of their human rights career, why they should bother investing time in making use of the system. So that's something we do quite a bit of with young defenders as well. In relation to collaboration with other special reporters, that collaboration is ongoing. It often happens on a case basis, where if she receives allegations about a particular defender and they're working, for instance, on the issue of freedom of expression, she would cooperate with the Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression. The rapporteurs are independent, and they guard that quite closely. So there is often joint press conferences, initiatives, campaigns, and sometimes meetings, but mostly they seem to me anyway, to have their own vision about how to execute the mandate, and they quite like to do it their own way, in the spirit of collaboration. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ed.
Right, thanks.
Before inviting our first panel for today, I would like to first invite on stage Said Mati Jah. Please join me, Said. Said was a participant in the first ever cohort of students at risk back in 2015 and studied at UIB when he was in Norway. Today, he is the co-founder and executive director of the Center for Research and Policy Development in the Gambia, and serves as a political science lecturer at the University of the Gambia. Welcome once again, Said.
Tusen takk.
We're going to have a very quick interview with Said right now. You were part of the first cohort of STAR. So I just want you to first share with the audience, what were you doing 10 years ago before coming to Norway? And do you remember when was the first time you heard about students at risk?
Yeah, so in 2014, basically, I was doing a research for Gallup poll in Gambia. And one of the questions asked about the approval rating of the president, former dictator, Yahya Jammeh. And so he did not like that. So he arrested me first in November. And, you know, students were protesting, were calling for my release, and later I was released after 1 week detention, and then later arrested again on December 10th, International Day of Human Rights. And then I was in jail for 2 weeks, remanded at the Central Prison. And that's where I heard about the Student Service Program, while I was in jail.
Yes.
Yes.
And once you arrived in Norway, in Bergen, how did it go? Had you heard about Norway before? Well, you just said that you heard about it.
Well, yeah. I heard about Norway before, but Bergen was the first time. I didn't know it was very rainy, but I got to love the rain. You know, so for me, the issue was just leaving my country, because I am one of those that have no plans of leaving. But of course, due to circumstances, then I was pushed out. So when I got to Bergen, it was a very, welcoming environment for me. I found SIHO there. The university was really, really helpful, especially Anna, the one that coordinated our program. So we had a very smooth entry. And there I also got to learn about CMI, what they do, the Center on Law and Social Transformation. And so those are the things that today in my work back home, that's what I also capitalize on, and engaging with the wider public. Yeah.
So how do you feel that these experiences when you were at UIB, when you were in Norway, the networks, what you learned, how does it reflect today in your work back in the Gambia?
Well, the networks that I built, what Norway provided me was safety. So there was a safety. I was in my room, and I was writing so many essays against the regime. I was also mobilizing a lot of the youths, because when I was in Gambia, I was a youth leader. So I was in Banjul, in the capital. I could reach those in the rural communities. So I was continuously doing that. But of course, I had, when I was arrested, Amnesty International was there. So I had also had that collaboration with Amnesty International. And so, but I also volunteered at the Center on Law and Social Transformation. And that volunteerism basically exposed me to the power of the law and how the law can be used as a tool for social transformation. So in Gambia, basically what I did the first time I got there in 2020, our National Assembly gave themselves a loan of 54 million. And I said this was not right. People are poor and all that. So we challenged that in the courts. And luckily, we got the court to remove that. And after that, we also been using the law and taking the National Assembly, our parliament, to court. We've took also the Independent Electoral Commission to court. And right now, as I am here, we are taking the police to court because we are in a transition in society. And in transition, the dictator used two institutions, the security institutions and also the parliament, passing the bad laws and also getting the security to do that. So we are challenging the parliament, and now we are also looking at the laws and how we can challenge that. And I'm doing this today because of the education I got, the safety I had here, but also the connections that I was able to develop, and also the lessons learned. But also in my research, I also partner with PRIO on their research on migration, because as you know, Gambia is a hot country for migration. And so we've had that collaboration continuously while I continue to do my research. And the dictator is away, and I am there now.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah.
One last question. What's coming next then inside life?
Well, right now we have a country to build. And after leaving here, my promise was to ensure that we effectively transition into a democratic society. I alone cannot do it, so that's why we set up the Center for Research and Policy Development, and that's where I'm mostly working with my students, but also working with young Gambians to make them believe in their own country, because if everybody leaves, who's going to be there to develop the country? And so right now, for the next 5 years, this is what I'm going to be working on, to ensure that the lessons learned, but also the dream of having a new Gambia is real, and also to ensure that people are not in need of many things. So we have to build that movement, and I think this solidarity, even coming here, is going to help to reconnect and refocus on that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Said. Please let's give him a warm applause. What have we achieved, and how did we do it? That is the guiding question for our next panel. As we discuss the beginning of the START program, our panelists will also help us look into the future and what remains to be done to achieve strengthened ownership among Norwegian stakeholders. So I would like to call on stage Hege Kristin Widnes from UiT, the Arctic University of Norway, Selma Bradberg, President of SAI, Hilde Kramer from the Directorate for Higher Education and Skills, and Gry Larsen, former State Secretary in the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs. Please give them a warm welcome.
Storleken.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll start with you, Selma. The demand for a Students at Risk program started with a campaign from both SAI and NSO. How was it that SAI came up with this idea?
Yes, I'll give a bit of background first. So SAI is a solidarity organization that was started by Norwegian students and academics in 1961. And today we are supporting student organizations, union, research centers, and institutions in 7 different countries. And protection of student activism is really at the core of what we do. And we assist student activists in a number of different ways, through legal assistance, scholarships, right training, and so on. But we also saw that there was a need for other protection mechanisms for those students who can't stay in their country and who are not able to finish their studies because of their activism. So, and also there were several protection mechanisms that did exist at this time for human rights defenders, but we saw that they didn't really meet the specific needs of student activists, because as a student activist, it's also important to be able to continue and finish your education. So, very much inspired by the Scholars at Risk program, we, together with the National Union of Students in Norway, came up with this idea that would later be known as the Students at Risk program. And a program that would give these student activists protection and a breathing space, but also, very importantly, allow them to finish their education. And you can see up here on the screen is a poster from one of the first campaigns that we did to advocate for a Students at Risk program. So through these campaigns, we both mobilized students across the whole country, rectors, universities, and talked to stakeholders and policymakers, like Gry, for example, to get this program established.
Thank you. This was another one.
Yes, that's another one.
Yes. Good. But then we'll move forward. I think we didn't give the Minister of Foreign Affairs a spoiler alert, so he already mentioned that Gry, you were a state secretary at that time. And how did this idea go from an idea from civil society to our reality? Was it all cheers and positivity, or what happened then?
Well, it wasn't all cheers. Not saying that there was strong resistance, more that when the idea came from SAIRO and NSO, we had several meetings, and we were discussing not, if we should do this, because I was very positive, and the foreign minister was also very positive, but it was more a discussion of how we're going to do it. And it wasn't only the foreign ministry that was involved, because it was also the Ministry of Higher Education in Norway, the Ministry of Justice. So in the government, there were many stakeholders. And, we had to have several meetings with all of them to make sure that we could say yes and that we could start the program. And I think, some were positive and some were more skeptical. Also, from a valued point of view, because some of the arguments were quite good, Should we, as Norway, have this program and use money on this program? Or should we use the same money to support human rights defenders in the countries where they come from. So there were, valued dilemmas and discussions, but in the end, I can just, say from a personal point of view that even though that there were some valid arguments again, in the end, we knew that we had to do something. And it wasn't either or. We can do both. We can support human rights defenders in the countries where they are, but some human rights defenders cannot do the work they do in their environments. They need to get out of their home countries. And here you have students, and I was quite young at the time, I'm a bit older now, and I can really relate to, and I've been a political campaigner all my life, and I could relate to personally that you're young, you fight for something, you're in the university, and why shouldn't they be protected and have the ability also to study? So I'm really happy that we achieved this program, and I thought that can I just say a bit?
Go ahead, yeah.
Because I think I've talked about this initiative that came from you many times, because I think it is a fantastic example also on how you need to deal with politicians if you want to get a change. Because SIH and NSO, they were crystal clear on what they wanted to achieve, but they were very pragmatic on how we were going to do it. You understood the dilemmas, you understood that we needed some time to talk to the different stakeholders in the government, but also higher education. So you gave us the time, and we had a really good dialogue. And we challenged you, and you challenged us back. So if it hadn't been for that dialogue, I don't think we've had the program today. So well done.
Thank you, Gry.
To the people before me.
And it was very kind of you of thinking about all the practical problems that could emerge. But at the end of the day, it was Hokodir who was given the task of managing the program. So Hilde, if you can maybe give us the basics of how the program works and what is Hokodir's role in this.
Yeah, so then it was over to the bureaucrats, But yeah, the Directorate for Higher Education and Skills, as Sveinung was saying, is an executive agency under the Ministry of Education and Research, and we work in higher education and higher vocational education, and also in responsible for national skills policy. And our mandate is very broad, and we work in various fields such as career guidance, coordinating a common application system for the bachelor programs in Norway, and recognition of foreign education, but then also internationalization, global cooperation, and capacity building. And as has been mentioned today, we have been managing the program for the last 10 years on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it's been an honor for us to be a part of this program and to develop it further. And has been mentioned now several times, it's about 145 students that have gone through the programs, but we've actually had more than 500 nominations that have come to us, and there are 9 cohorts of students that have been through the program. We had we had to pause the program a little bit through the pandemic, but then we were up and running again. And it's a very long process. It takes almost a year from the start until the students get here, and there are very many actors that are involved. If we count all the embassies and everybody, it's more than 70 actors that may have a potential role in the program. And we start with the nominating phase, and the students cannot apply to the program. They have to be nominated by one of the nominating actors, which are selected human rights organizations, also the embassies, but also the participating universities. And they can nominate students, and this is a quote from our regulations, that due to their human rights activism are at risk of being formally or de facto denied education or other rights. And so they do that assessment, and we never go back and check that assessment. That's all on the nominating actors. And then we assess their academic backgrounds, their language skills. We interview the candidates and see whether or not they're qualified for the program. And then we take that over to the participating institutions, and they offer the students admission to relevant programs at bachelor and master's level. And then when they are admitted, then they can apply for a study permit, and we provide the scholarship for the students when they're here in Norway, as well as including travel to Norway. And we have a very good dialogue with the immigration authorities and also a great collaboration with the institutions, and they really, has been stressed already, but they really do go the extra mile for the students to make sure that they come to Norway and that they have a good stay when they're here. So I think I'll stop there.
Maybe I also heard that you were going to talk a little bit about where do they come? Where are we getting STAR students?
Yeah, so
from?
most of the students come from very many different countries, as you can see behind me, but we have had through the years quite a few students from Zimbabwe, from Turkey, from Russia, Belarus, and Eswatini. But then there's also a very large spread, geographic spread among the countries.
Thank you. Now, moving forward, we have Hege from UIT also with us. Your university has welcomed several STAR students throughout these 10 years. Can you maybe share some experience? How has the program been at UIT? What happens with STAR there at the university?
Yeah, first I have to say that it's a very good cooperation we have with all agents there, and there's so many involved stakeholders, and it's a privilege to work with the program. And I also have to say that it is the institutions that are the privileged one to finally receive the students and have them as part of our community. So what is this, the starting point is very important, and that is that we are going to provide an education. We don't have any other demands to the students than they are going to study. And we then also say that we provide the safety and security to be able to study. Some students choose to be students activists also when they stay in Norway, but some also say that it's nice just to concentrate a little while and study. It's a very diverse group of students we are getting. Some are traumatized of what they have experienced, maybe also coming to the northernmost university in the world, where we are entering the dark polar nights, we can call them, with beautiful northern light. It can be very demanding. So we have a very good cooperation with both the academics, that will provide them top education and are also aware about the situation, but also with the student welfare organization, the counseling center, and also we have involved the trauma team at University Hospital in Northern Norway to be properly prepared. So I think that's,
That's a good start. I think we have now laid the ground on what STAR is, how it became a reality, some of the challenges, discussions, how it is being managed now. So now we go to the interesting part, which is challenging all of you in what remains to be done then, also learning from what has already been told here. And I want to start with you, Hege, maybe, because the university is responsible for the students, like you said, for their studies once they arrive. But their life doesn't end when they receive the diploma, right? What happens afterwards with these students? Is that a challenge still to be addressed, or how is it going right now with after studies?
Yeah, how to say that that is something we have been asking about a lot of times. It's the exit strategies. I mean, those who come from not our students at risk, I don't know if you remember when you were finishing your studies, it was quite work-intensive towards the end of your studies. But you knew that you were quite safe and secure what was happening afterwards. It's extremely challenging to try to write your master thesis and know that 1 month later you don't know really what you're going to do. It might not be safe and secure to go home to your home country, and the funding is ending. So to have some more support there. My university have decided to try to support students a little bit. For instance, some have had had to apply for protection or asylum, which is very demanding. But it would really be good if the program could have a little exit strategy. For instance, be offering internship in a human rights organization, for instance, or to give the possibility to maybe study half a year longer, to have the possibility to find out what to do afterwards. And in that connection, I just have to say, since I got from one of our former students just kicking in this morning, and I'm just asking, 1, what did the START program mean for you? 2, challenges. And the mail came this morning, and he said that the START program for me was an essential springboard to position myself to make a positive contribution to my country and continent. The scholarship did not only provide immediate safety from the threats that I faced as a student activist, but it also provided a platform and opportunity for me to continue with my education. Having been blacklisted by my government with little prospects for gaining employment in the sector, the further education enabled me to be in a better position to take care of my family and my siblings. I have since returned to my home country, where I'm running a peace-building organization which aims at creating a conducive environment for a broad national dialogue that has the potential to end our country's crisis. The only recommendation I have for the scholarship is that it should allow beneficiaries enough time and support until they feel ready to go back to their countries, to be in a position to positively impact their countries and take up their activism. When the 2 years of my master's were done, I did not feel like I was ready to return to my country. I had focused mainly on my studies and healing from the traumas of the past events. However, after an additional year and a half, I felt better prepared to return home. It would also be important if the scholarship is accompanied by a sister organization or fund that supports the initiatives of its alumni, which could better empower them to transform their societies, eventually ending the need for student activists to be in so much danger so as to flee their country. So that is one of my recommendations, to look at that part of it.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Now, moving forward, maybe there's been 2 goals, as I remember, with the Students at Risk program. Making it a permanent program at the very beginning. We can say check on that one. But there has also been the ambition on making it an international network, or for it to not only be a Norwegian thing. I know that both Hokodir and SAI has engaged with this idea of exporting the Students at Risk program. So if both of you can maybe share some perspective on how is that work, or what's the goal with that work. You can decide whoever goes first.
Yeah, so we are very happy to share our experience of running this program, and we have done so with, for instance, the DAAD, and they have established the Hilde de Meen program, Student at Risk program, which is not completely the same, but very similar to our program, and we are very happy about that. And Salma and I, we also had the honor of being at the Nordic Council and presenting the Student at Risk program last winter, I think it was, and we're not sure what will come out of that, but we are more than willing to help other countries if they want to establish a similar program.
Thank you. Selma?
I actually want to mention 3 things that I think can be improved or strengthened. And the first thing is that we need to strengthen the program so that it doesn't become like a regular scholarship program. We need to invest in opportunities for students to connect with each other, for knowledge building and capacity building. It's, like Hege mentioned, it's totally up to the students while they're here if they want to continue their activism. But for a lot of students, and we also have gotten feedback from the students on this, that it is very important for them to meet other students that are here, both on the same year, but also students that have been here for maybe a year or 2, so that they can share experiences. So we need to invest in that. Secondly, I think we need to increase the number of spots in the Norwegian program. We've seen a dramatic increase in students that contact us about the program, and we also see an increase in how many students are nominated, and also the number of students that are eligible for the program also far exceeds the number of spots, the 20 spots that we have today. And just as one example, for the 2024 cohort now, SAI alone nominated more than 50 students for the program, and we're only one of many nominating actors. So there is a need to increase the number of spots. And then lastly, to your question, we also see a need to share our experiences and try to establish similar programs in more countries, both to answer to the increasing need that we're seeing, but also to answer to language barriers. For example, in order to study in Norway, you need to know English or Norwegian, so that excludes many Spanish-speaking students, for example. But we also think it's important to, where it's possible, to also establish similar programs kind of closer to where the students are. For some students, it's not that far to travel to Norway, but also many students need to kind of travel across the world. So also having similar programs closer is also valuable. And we already see that there is big interest. You mentioned some examples. We've also been in contact with the student movements across different European countries. Yeah, you mentioned the Nordic Council, and yeah, so we see that there is a big interest, and we. Yeah, so we need to also, both we, the directorate, but also the Norwegian government need to share these experiences and to talk about it.
Thank you. And we'll move on now to the Norwegian government. But just before that, do we have a representative from the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the room? Are there a couple? Yes? If there aren't, then someone record this next question, please. Because for many years we heard you talked about 20 spots. And it was always there's 20 spots for students at risk students. But that's a soft roof. If we ever come to the situation where we need to receive more, it's not a problem. We'll find the funds. We'll fix it. The need for students to come to Norway and have this protection has increased over the years, unfortunately. And we reached that situation where then some students were left out because there was no funding. Talking about how to deal with politicians. Gry, what advice? A recommendation for all the organizations, universities, and that are now engaged and have reached this stage in the program, where we see that it's not an if, but it's how fast, maybe, can we make it bigger? What would you recommend? How can they deal with politicians when what they were saying didn't become a reality?
Well, I think it's important to discontinue the dialogue. I mean, having been a politician, being a politician in 2024 in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs compared to when I was a politician,
not easy. 2009
to 2013, it's a total different international world. So I respect that some of the decisions they have to do today are totally different from the one I was involved in at that time. But continue the cooperation, the dialogue with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The way I know the people working on human rights in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they are engaged. They have a lot of detail. They know about the human rights situation in the world. They are dedicated. So continue to have that dialogue and push the politicians. You know, push the opposition. Talk to the different members of the Committee in the Foreign Affairs. And I'm sure you do all of these things, but step up the game. And do that work. And then I also think it's good to have a Norwegian strategy, but it's also very good to have an international strategy at the same time. Because I think that some of the experiences that we've now had in Norway over the 10 years with this program are good, both experiences, but also arguments for why other countries also should have programs like this. And in a situation and in a world where we know that human rights defenders and people that need protection are on the rise, because it is so important that we get other countries also to join. I know that some countries have started and more countries are thinking about it, but making that a reality would be a huge effort. And that you, all of the stakeholders involved, can share all of your experience, and also you as stars, because you are really true stars, can also come with the personal testimonies and explain how important this has been. I think it's, yeah.
Thank you.
That's the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It was more drawing from your expertise. But Hege, yes, Hilde.
But yeah, I just would like to mention that that is correct that this year we have had we've reached the max and we've had 20 scholarships. But I would like to mention that last year we were able to secure extra funding both for the regular cohort and for a special cohort for students for Russia. So last year we had almost 35 students. Yes. So unfortunately, and we have a very close dialogue with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and unfortunately we were not able to secure extra funding this year, but we will continue that dialogue.
Yes, thank you. But talking about the extra cohorts that came, I know that UIT, you were expecting some students.
Yeah, I was actually asking if I could have a little plea here at the end. And that was because we've been very happy that we have had this flexibility, that we had the Belarusian students in one cohort and then Russian students last year. And also, it was a call for Russian students this year. And only in June, it was told that there was no funding for it. And at that time, we had been quite engaged with the student that we had both nominated and had interviewed to come to our university. And it was a Russian student, an activist, had also to flee to another country because he was mobilized for a war he didn't want to fight. And it felt like you had a destiny in your hands, and actually our rector found own funding from the university to fund this student. It was one among 5 students. And what is happening now is that UDI will not give a residence permit because you have this returnability, which is what you need to have to get a residence permit. And the beautiful thing about the STAR program is that they are more lenient with that part. But they are not willing to see these students as a STAR student, even if it have been through the nomination and are eligible for the program. It's only the funding that comes from a different place. So they don't want to see him as a student or even equalize him as a student. And unfortunately, his case is finished at UDI and is now with UNE, which is never a good sign. So if there is anybody here who can help us to fight this fight. I actually got a mail this morning from the leader of his study program, which is preschool teacher, which is a beautiful program, and said that we are still willing to receive the student. But now he has to come, but we will accommodate so he can go into studies. So please help us. We was waiting 8 months for a student from Myanmar, but we don't want to wait that long this time.
Yes, thank you. Also very related to what Mary Loller mentioned with the visa requirements and such. But Norway is very quick in implementing EU policies, so hopefully this will be soon fixed, right? But maybe now we still have some minutes, so I would like maybe if you have other challenge or way something else to mention, then we can have one last topic maybe that we have time to address. Hege?
Yeah, I think one very important thing which I haven't touched upon is why it is important for the universities to have. It was talked about why can we not support activists in their home countries. But I think just like Rector Stern was saying, it's only to have the program, even if it's not very public. The students own their own stories. They don't have to share it with anyone. And it's a constant reminder of the values that we cherish, which is academic freedom, it's democracy. And it is, and human rights, of course. And I think that also reminds us that is value which we need to convey to our new generations of students so they can be agents for change. And it's also important to have students with us. It's in these days when we have tuition fee, our universities are less diverse, less colorful. So it contributes in a little way to this. We also have students that are absolutely activists when they're here, and they're kind of teaching a well-fed middle-class Norwegian students that have forget a little bit how to be activists. So, I mean, the Palestine demonstration is very much led by one of our star students. So, and most important, maybe also because we are an academic institution and that is in focus, is that today it's not about lecturing students. It's about participation from students to make a better learning environment and a better program. And of course, you can read about human activists in other countries, but to actually have one among you is a totally different thing.
Thank you.
I think it's been mentioned already that and many Norwegian institutions are welcoming both students at risk and scholars at risk. And I think we have mentioned already that I think there is a difference. I think students maybe need maybe more support or different support than the scholars. And together with institutions, we really try to do our best. And again, we're really thankful for all the support that the institutions do. But I think we can even do more there. And I think also it's not in our mandate from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but the follow-up of students after they graduate to know more about what happens to them afterwards, I think is something that we would like to also work on more.
Yes, so since the Students at Risk program was established, we have seen that there are, for example, more nominating actors on board. The program is more known among the Norwegian embassies. The Students at Risk program is mentioned, for example, in the Norwegian guidelines for support to human rights defenders. But we still see that the program to some degree is dependent on kind of engaged individual people. So I think there is still a need to make the program more known among at the embassies, for example, and with actors working with the program, and also to make it more institutionalized. So there I think we still have some way to go. And then I would also just urge, and I hope someone can bring this back to the minister and the ministry, but like we hear, and the minister just talked very nicely about how this is a priority for Norway, but we're still waiting to see concrete measures that reflects that priority. So. Yes, that's something I'm hoping to see soon.
Thank you. And maybe just before I have a last question for you, Gry, but I forgot to mention there's also been some talk about the different needs you already mentioned. You know, it's not the same scholars at risk as students at risk. But there is one common characteristic in these two programs, and is that usually there's a luggage or something that these people bring with themselves due to the risk they have been exposed to and the persecution. And I know there's been some talks around the need for psychosocial help for the students once they arrive here. So I don't know, Hilde, if you have some thoughts on what remains to be done on that area, or what kind of support could be useful, if you could share that with us. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very important topic, of course, and we have a student gathering that we just had yesterday for the new students, and we talk about it there, and then we very much rely also on the studentsamskipnad, the student support system that are at the institutions, and I know that Hege and her colleague really go the extra mile to help the students get the support that they need from the health services in Norway. So we do have a lot of focus on that. And the program can also even fund extra medical expenses that the students would have during their stay in Norway if it's not covered by the regular health services. Mm.
Thank you. Gry, you get the last question. I just want to hear, you were there when this came as an idea. 10 years later, I don't know if you imagined that we would be here, this would happen. But what was it that you felt at that moment? Why is this important? If someone is maybe listening about students at risk for the first time today in 2024, why is students at risk important? What made you feel so motivated when it came to your desk?
Because it wasn't an illusion of an idea. It was something that we actually could do. And I had human rights under my portfolio at that time. We had made human rights defenders a priority in our human rights policy. And as a politician, of course, I was looking for, what should we practically do, You can have fantastic speeches, you can talk about all of the right things, but being a politician is about, helping people on the ground. So we were looking at, different ideas, different initiatives, and there's this film, I can't remember the name of the film, but where someone says, "You had me at hello." Okay, have you seen that movie? And it was the same when you came into SIH and Sue came in at the first meeting. I mean, I was sold because I just thought that, these are young human rights defenders. They are so needed in the countries where they are. They're so needed in the world. They are the voices of all of us. Of course, they have to be able to also finish their studies. Being an activist, if you're thrown out of university because of your activism, that's not right. Of course, they should come to Norway. And when the universities and different ministries were open for the idea, what not to do? Of course we should do this. And then in 10 years from now, I hope we still sit here and that we can see programs, all over the world. And also that we have managed to secure even more funding. And I really like your idea about the exit strategy. I think that's a good way to think about it. So I hope you can welcome me back in 10 years from now.
We're on the sidelines now, but they will keep on working with everything that we have discussed in this panel. So thanks a lot for joining us and for this amazing conversation. Give them a hand. Now we will have today's first coffee break. So we will come back to this room exactly 10 minutes past 2. So you have approximately 30 minutes to talk with each other. Please use that opportunity and also to try and address all of the issues that have been raised here. So we see each other 10 minutes past 2. Thank you. Tusen takk. Thanks a lot, Gry.
Thank you.
Do I just keep this?
If you will.
Yeah. I just clicked, but it's still on, right?
Yeah, but the sound is off.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay. Good. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So it's going to be a presentation from Amy about the research, and then we'll go to the just made it better than the hair. I can help you. I can lift your hair.
I'm so uncoordinated.
You can take it underneath.
female students, they are faced with the struggle of harassment in institutions, torture, beatings because of fighting for academic freedom. They are also faced with sexual harassment through their male counterparts, through university lecturers, but rarely is their story told. My name is Joanna Mamombe. I come from Zimbabwe, and I'm a student at risk. The post-colonial independence government, led by President Robert Mugabe, has expelled many university students. On the 13th of November 2015, a group of female students that I led through a protest for academic freedoms. We were arrested, we were beaten up, we were tortured because we're just holding placards. Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter." I refused to be silenced. I have left home, I have left family, I have left my friends. But as soon as I finish my studies, I'm prepared to go back home and finish the struggle for democracy, academic freedom, and good governance. The struggle continues, and victory is certain.
That was Joanna Ruvimbo Mamombe in a video she made in 2017 when she was a star student in Bergen. Now, Joanna is in her second term as an opposition parliamentarian in Zimbabwe, still fighting for democracy. Unfortunately, attacks such as the ones Joanna mentioned in her video are still a reality today. In the past years, SAI has supported research efforts to better document and understand attacks on students and academics. In our next presentation, we'll be hearing some insights from such efforts, which will cover the global landscape of attacks on higher education and student expression. This presentation will be given by Amy Capit. Amy is the Senior Program Officer for Advocacy at Scholars at Risk, where she leads efforts on the Free to Think report series and the Academic Freedom Monitoring Project. She is also the lead researcher for SAI's Activism Under Attack report, focusing on the repression of student activism. Please welcome her on stage.
Which button? Sorry, this button. That's one. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here today to talk to you a little bit about two pieces of research that I have been involved in recently. Let's see. So first, I just want to, since I'm going to be drawing on a bunch of information, I want to give you a sense of where I'm going. I'm going to give you an overview of the two projects. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the global landscape of attacks on higher education before turning to some of the key ways that student activism in particular is repressed. And then I'll conclude with a few recommendations. So the first project is this report that you all have access to today. It's out today. It's just to give you a little bit of the background of that report. It builds on prior SAI work, protecting student activists, and aims to address gaps in data on human rights violations against students. The project broadly is part of a broader project with three components, which include documentation of the problem, mobilization of networks and alliances to support students at risk, and then other protection efforts like legal aid, rapid response, etc. The report that's out today is the second report that we've done as part of this project. And what it aims to foreground the voices of students, explaining what activism means to them and the most significant factors that they perceive as undermining their activism. The second report is Scholars at Risk's Free to Think report. So this is an annual, well, first of all, Scholars at Risk is an international network of institutions and individuals whose mission it is to protect scholars and promote academic freedom. We produce an annual report, Free to Think, which examines attacks on higher education, which we've published since 2015. And the basis for the report is our academic freedom monitoring project. I always like to point out that this report is illustrative of current trends. It's not comprehensive. So the figures and the incidents that are described in the report represent only a fraction of the total annual number of attacks that occur. And this is partially because we don't have access to all of the information. There's self-censorship among people who have experienced violations. There's limitations on project staffing. We're a very small team. And there's an underdeveloped and restrictions on media environments in many places where we do our monitoring work. A lot of our information comes from media reporting. The next edition, the 2024 edition of the report, is actually going to be out 1 week from today, so please look out for that as well. Turning now to the global landscape of attacks on higher education over the past year, I'm going to give you actually a brief preview of the report coming out next week. So SAR's monitoring has shown for years that attacks on higher education are common in more authoritarian environments, but attacks are not limited to authoritarian environments. For example, for the past several years, elected officials in certain democratic countries have proposed or passed laws and policies that undermine institutional autonomy of universities and higher education institutions, and scholars and students' academic freedom and right to voice dissent. Some of the key patterns that Scholars at Risk noted this year are violent attacks, which destroyed higher education systems in new and ongoing armed conflicts, including, of course, in Gaza, where the entire higher education system has been destroyed, Sudan, Ukraine, and Myanmar. States crack down on dissent by forcibly arresting, dispersing protests, prosecuting scholars and students for criticizing government policies or actions. And under external pressure by the government and also members of the public, universities have sometimes been complicit in silencing scholars and students, including by terminating contracts, for example, of dissenting professors. Along these lines, this year, we've reported more loss of position cases than is the norm. This could be due to an information bias. We're seeing a lot of loss of position cases happening in places like the United States and Europe, where we have access to better information. It's possible that loss of position has been occurring for years and years and years in places where we don't have as good access to information. And then the final trend is that both authoritarian regimes and democratically elected officials with autocratic impulses introduced, passed, and implemented illiberal legislation and policies that undermine democratic institutions broadly, including universities. Along these lines, this year, SAR has reported a higher proportion also of events in democratic countries than in prior years, particularly in the United States and Europe. This map shows you the 17 contexts that are highlighted in this year's report. It includes Afghanistan, China, Colombia, Germany, Hong Kong, India, Iran, Israel, Nicaragua, Nigeria, the occupied Palestinian territory, Russia, Turkey, Sudan, Ukraine, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And to put this into the kind of broader picture for the last decade, the 2023 update of the Academic Freedom Index shows clearly that levels of academic freedom are declining globally. According to the Academic Freedom Index, more than half of the world's population currently lives in contexts with completely restricted or severely restricted levels of academic freedom. In 15 of the 17 contexts that are highlighted in this year's Free to Think report, academic freedom has declined over the past decade. And I'll just point out that this includes contexts that are at all ends of the academic freedom spectrum. So you can see here that there are some countries that started much lower, and some countries that have declined from pretty high levels of academic freedom and still have high levels, but exhibit a clear decline. So why do attacks on higher education matter? Attacks on higher education do not just harm the immediate victim, they have a chilling effect that erodes democracy. They stifle intellectual inquiry and the free exchange of ideas. Universities, we like to say, are as essential to a free society as a free press or an independent judiciary. And I think it's also important to point out that attacks on higher education and authoritarianism compound each other. So the most severe forms of attacks on higher education occur in authoritarian settings, but because attacks also undermine democracy, they contribute to a decline and an increase in authoritarianism, and therefore make attacks on higher education more likely. So there's this kind of cyclical effect. In Free to Think 2024, we report on attacks on student expression. And every year, including this year, attacks on student expression make up about 47 to 50% of the attacks on higher education that we track. Some examples from this year are the example of Iran. So in Iran, students continue to be targeted for their activism with the Women Life Freedom Movement. As of May 2024, it was estimated that more than 700 students had been arrested, attacked, or beaten for participating in demonstrations at universities. I think no discussion of this year would be complete without mentioning the crackdown on student protests against Israel's military assault on Gaza. The picture on the screen is from the encampment established at Columbia University on April 17th of this year. On April 18th, the following day, the Columbia president, Manoush Shafiq, first suspended all students involved in the encampment and formally requested that the police intervene and disperse the students. 108 students were arrested, and the arrests and the pictures from that day, I think, contributed to sparking intensified student protests across different regions of the world. And then finally, something a little bit different. We saw universities putting in place policies to shrink the space for student activism. So on the screen, you can see that SAR reported on 2 such incidents in India. They include JNU, which issued a directive banning students from hanging posters or staging sit-in protests within 100 meters of academic buildings, and South Asian University, which began requiring admitted students to sign a 13-point pledge to refrain from protesting, agitating, or striking on campus, and to declare that they are physically and mentally healthy. Throughout the past summer, also, universities in the United States have been revising their policies to limit the space for student activism. So why does student activism matter? First of all, students are essential contributors to university life. They help drive intellectual discourse. I know as a professor, former professor, when I often felt like my students challenged me to think about my research questions in ways that I would not have otherwise thought. And ways that I would not have thought just by having conversations with my colleagues. The students pushed my intellectual thought. University students have long, as we've heard repeatedly today, been important actors in movements for social change, human rights, democratization. And I also think it's important to note that learning occurs through activism. This is one of the reasons activism in particular is an important component of university life. We can think about activism as a form of active learning. It's a key tenet, which is a key tenet of progressive education. I should say I have a background as an education researcher in particular. It's well documented that some of the most transformative educational moments happen outside of the classroom, and that includes through activism. So if we want people to learn to be contributing members of an active, engaged civic society, I think we should be supporting students in engaging in activism in the university. So activism under attack. Let me talk a little bit about the methodology. We analyzed survey data from 263 students who are activists in 36 countries. And we conducted qualitative interviews with 28 students who are activists in 19 countries. So it was a very global outreach. You can see we went through size networks to conduct the research, so we did end up with slightly higher proportions of representation of students in certain countries than in others. But also, if you look over at the two graphs on the left-hand side, your right-hand side, you'll see that we had high levels of representation from students who are activists in places both with completely restricted levels of academic freedom and also, on the flip side, in places with fully free or moderately free levels of academic freedom, according to the Academic Freedom Index. So I'll just highlight a few of the key findings before I show you some of what the students that we talked to said. Students did talk about facing police repression, including violence and imprisonment for their activism, but they also underscored the ways in which repression came from those more closely linked to their daily lives, including administrators, faculty members, or other students or their family members. And I think it's important to focus on these because those forms of repression or suppression, whatever you want to call it, create the conditions for the graver violations that occur, for the arrests, the beatings, the detentions. In particular, two forms of activism stood out. The first is lawfare, and in particular, university lawfare. And I would define lawfare as selectively enforcing policies or changing policies with a particular political motivation to quash speech and quash political action, or to embroil students in frivolous and ungrounded internal administrative complaints. This mirrors, for example, what Free to Think documented this year in the ways that universities are shrinking the space for activism through policy. Then the second category is what I call relational repression, which functions by targeting the social fabric and tearing apart social ties. And that I include there delegitimizing rhetoric, and I'll provide a few examples in a couple minutes, and social pressure from family members and classmates. And the research shows that repression is particularly insidious when it targets community. So on the flip side, community is also what we highlight as one of the recommendations. Students talked quite a bit about how it was their community that sustained their activism. So turning now to a couple of quotes, just describing university lawfare, I think that this quote from a student in East Africa highlighting that it used to be the government engaging in repression, but now it's the university management that's discouraging us from activism. And then you see a quote there from North America that talks kind of concretely about how the administration at their university wrote a note to faculty members saying, if you see students who are causing trouble, then let the campus police know. You can see here, this is a graph that's included in the report. It's a little complicated to look at, so you probably won't have time to fully digest it while I'm standing up here talking. But I'll highlight that the most common forms of lawfare that students faced were about 40% of students surveyed said that they had faced disciplinary review for their activism. Around 36% of students said that they had been failed for their activism, and around 55% of students said that they had been threatened with failure, expulsion, or suspension for their activism. Turning now to delegitimization. So I'll highlight two forms of delegitimization. The first one focuses on students' youth and, quote, immaturity. And I'll point out that this one is something that's not just used by those trying to undermine student activists. It actually can be perhaps unintentionally used by people who are potential allies. So those who work for example, a human rights organization that's trying to support students might say to them, no, your tactics are wrong. You don't really know what you're doing. So we have up here a couple quotes. You'll only harm yourself. You're so naive. The second form of delegitimizing rhetoric is one calling them troublemakers. Of course, we heard an example of that at the beginning of today. Not necessarily, it was criminals and terrorists in your case. You know, one person, I think really troublingly talked about being called a cockroach, which is dehumanizing rhetoric. Those types of rhetoric are the ones that help justify police brutality. Finally, social pressure. So I'll highlight two forms of social pressure here. One that families exert on students, saying things like, we sent you to school to study, we didn't send you to school to do politics. The second is that state officials, or I heard an example yesterday of university officials putting pressure, calling up family members and saying, your child is doing something that they're being a troublemaker. You need to stop them from engaging in this. But you see also on the screen here, you know, my older brother, this is a student activist from Central America, my oldest brothers were dismissed from their jobs because of my activism. So putting pressure on family members in order to leverage that pressure to get students to stop engaging in activism. And as you, this is again a graph from the report that highlights some of the most common forms of repression. I think it's not surprising at the bottom, national legislation was a big constraining factor on activism, but also students pointed to negative social perception, which more than a quarter of students said had constrained their activism, and delegitimization, which about 32% of students said was a factor students surveyed said that was a factor in preventing them from engaging in activism. So as you might imagine, this causes a really significant toll. It causes a toll on physical health, mental health, emotional well-being. And you can see up here a few quotes from the students we spoke with saying, you know, being an activist is a blessing and a curse at the same time. Maybe if I was a good kid, my focus would be academic, so second-guessing themselves. I think it's also here important to point out that privilege has a role in deciding whether or not people get to step away from their activism. So some people for example, people with marginalized identities, queer identities, if they want to live their lives, they have to engage in some degree of activism. It might not be super visible, it might be more subtle, but you know, not all activists have the choice to step away from their activism. So finally, I'll just conclude with a few recommendations. I want to provide recommendations first from the students. So what the students really said helps sustain their activism is community and solidarity. So I think that this second quote is a really good quote that talks about really key steps that activists use to help keep themselves healthy. They said we flow in and flow out so that people don't burn out. We give what we can when we're able to, and we support each other in that way. And finally, a few recommendations for governments, diplomatic missions, universities, and international societies, which are organized around the themes of recognizing the problem, so building consensus that this is a problem, which I think, you know, if I listen to the dialogue here today, I think is happening. Documentation of the problem, implementation of endorsement, development, and implementing protections for academic freedom based on the principles for implementing the right to academic freedom. This is a set of principles that includes 9 essential aspects of academic freedom grounded in existing human rights commitments. And the principles specifically note that students have the right to academic freedom. And then finally, investing in protection mechanisms, like, for example, the Students at Risk program that we're celebrating here today. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Amy. The report that Amy mentioned has been, there's some printouts, so you can actually just grab a copy on your way out today. So please don't forget to do that so you can learn more about this topic. Next in the program, we have our second panel called The Role of Higher Education Institutions in Supporting Human Rights Defenders, Experiences from Existing Support Mechanisms and the Need to Scale Up Efforts. This panel will be moderated by Dr. Alice Na. Alice is an associate professor at Durham University, and her research focuses on the security, protection, and well-being of people who promote and protect human rights. She is also chairing the Board of Protection International, an NGO that supports human rights defenders in developing their security and protection management strategies. Please welcome her on stage.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. Can I also invite Christian and Camilla and Washington to join me on stage? It's really hard to do this panel after that really thought-provoking report by Amy. So thank you so much for that. It gives us so much to think about and to reflect upon. And I think it really... hi, hello. Hi, nice to see you. Come and sit down. But it gives us so much to think about for this panel, which focuses on the role of higher education institutions in the protection of students as human rights defenders at risk. Because Amy has highlighted in the report a lot of the struggles that students face. Some of the more high-profile ones that we see in the news or that we're disturbed about are the arrests and detention, and sometimes, unfortunately, torture of student activists, and also the police brutality that we see. And that's sort of the most, I guess, impactful visible threats and attacks to students. But I think, as your report highlights as well, there's a more hidden and invisible dimension, which is the role of higher education institutions in clamping down on students in an everyday way, but also the damage that is caused through the destruction, the deliberate destruction of the social fabric around human rights offenders and students. So I think in our panel today, I would love to hear more from perhaps Washington first, and then Camilla, and then Christian, about the role that we as institutions can play in supporting students at risk. And first of all, maybe invite you to share about your work and what you focus on. And then I have a question for each of you to reflect on, and then, we can think about this together. So maybe, Washington, we can start with you. And you lead the Southern Defenders Network. Can you share with us more about what the Southern Defenders Network does?
Thank you so much, Alice, and the organizers of this historic event. It's a celebration, 10 years of resilience and tenacity, service and sacrifice. We don't take this for granted. My name is Washington Katema, and I'm the director of Southern Africa Human Rights Defenders Network, and in short, it's Southern Defenders. We exist to provide human rights defenders at risk. And in the current context, we see student activists, students at risk as human rights defenders. We also work to push back on the shrinking and shifting. Also work on providing demand-driven capacity development to human rights defenders, to HRDs at risk and also not at risk, because we believe in building resilience, the ability to bend without breaking. And we also believe in the philosophy that HRDs at risk, students at risk, must be safe but not silent. So that is what we do. And we work in this human rights ecosystem in partnership with a number of players, including SAI and other critical actors. So that is what we do as Southern Defenders.
Yeah. And you witness in your work the kinds of repression that is happening in these countries in Southern Africa against students. How do you see the role of programs like the STAR program in supporting human rights movements, whether that's bringing students to Norway? Is there a broader role? Where do you see the place of programs like the STAR program?
To me, it's a demonstration and affirmation of the power of love. From where we come from, the governments, our leaders, have shown that they've got love for power. And they tend to abuse it. As you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. We've got students from Swaziland, Eswatini, as it is called now, and they've been living under an absolute monarchy, an absolute dictatorship. And this started a long time ago, I think with the 11 April 1973 proclamation, which resulted in Swaziland, or Eswatini as we know it today, becoming an absolute monarchy. The king suspending the constitution and putting himself above any governance structure. And the new governance structure still fuels dissent and democratic progress. And we have seen with time, especially what happened in 2021, June, the protests. And this followed the assassination of a student at the University of Swaziland who was doing law, Tawani Gomonye. And after that, the widespread protests, which resulted in more than 200 people dying, left a trail of destruction. And those who were targeted as student activists because they're at the core face of the challenges facing Swaziland. 21 January 2023, the assassination of Thulani Maseko was also a university lecturer and a student at the University of Pretoria. And just recently, 15 July this year, the sentencing of the 2 MPs who were calling for democratic reforms, Mududus Mabuza and Mtanden Due. For Mududus, it was 25 years in prison, and for Mtanden Due, 18 years in prison, just for calling for democratic reforms and for citizens to be treated as citizens and not as subjects. And even my native country, Zimbabwe, has been in a crisis for a very long time. Small country with big problems. And that's why you see the highest number of participants in this student at risk program coming from Zimbabwe. Context is critical. There's suffocation of a civic space, stifling of academic freedoms. And that's why you see most of the students coming to study abroad. I myself I'm a beneficiary of the Libertas program in the Netherlands. Yeah. I did my master's in the Netherlands on a similar program because I couldn't finish my studies in Zimbabwe. And this is the case with a number of students, activists in most of these authoritarian-leaning states.
Thank you so much for that, Washington. Camilla, can I come to you and ask you more about your work? Can you share with us about what the Coalition on Academic Freedom in the Americas does? What are the programs of work that you do?
Yes, thank you for the question. And first and foremost, thank you for the invitation that Sai has made for us to be here as a coalition. And congratulations on the 10 years of the program. It's really an honor, and I am so impressed. The Coalition for Academic Freedom in the Americas started in 2021. I joined recently in March of this year as its first director. And fundamentally, we are pushing for the acknowledgement of academic freedom understood as a fundamental human right. As Amy and others were saying, this still needs a lot of public agenda setting. It's not really understood as a right, and as a right articulated to many other rights, the right to education, the right of freedom of expression, of mobilization, of protest, and understood really holistically as something that is intramural and extramural, understood as something that happens with teaching, learning, research, dissemination of opinion in the media. So first and foremost, really establishing this as an understanding and making academic freedom part of the policy discourse and the political discourse is something that we feel is urgent. We are a network of individuals across all of the Americas, which as a Brazilian, I have to say how delighted I am that we are actually crossing the north-south divide and actually working alongside the full continent of the Americas. And we have, of course, also political and strategic relations with a number of organizations, but our base is made of individual activists. We do monitoring in partnership also with Scholars at Risk and others increasingly. We work with research and knowledge production as well. And this dimension of solidarity, we feel that is a fundamental component that we want to explore more and more. Lastly, I think that something to mention is the convening of different actors as a strategy. We feel that that is very important. So, for example, the liaising activists from across the region, including students, to speak to the different special rapporteurs from the Inter-American system and abroad, that is something that is fundamental. In Latin America, actually in the Americas, we have the Inter-American Principles of Implementation of the Inter-American Principles of Academic Freedom and University Autonomy that were approved. For us, this is a very significant instrument alongside what Amy and others mentioned, which is the implementing principles of academic freedom, which is a global initiative. But having Inter-American principles gives us let's say, a baseline, a starting point from which to really struggle for the implementation of this right.
That's really interesting, especially the regional dimensions of these global debates, no? Because it has to be, a lot of our struggles are very much rooted in the politics and the culture of the places that we're at. So we've learned a lot about the STAR program today, but one of the issues mentioned was about that it's an English, primarily English program, and we have lots of students from who speak different languages, not English. So how do you see we can sort of bring our solidarity behind students who don't speak English? Yeah. What are your thoughts?
I think that the question is excellent. The question on language is fundamental. I also noted that Hector asked about psychological support. And these are dimensions that, coming from our perspective, let's say, are very important for a program, for similar programs to actually embrace, let's say, as principles, as fundamentals. For me, this program the STAR program is very inspiring. I think that we should work towards establishing something similar across the Americas. I do think that the SDG 4 context, Sustainable Development Goal context, and the high-level steering committee meetings that happen, the global education ministerial meeting that is going to happen in November in Fortaleza, Brazil, these are spaces where programs like this should really be put to the forefront as examples of what cooperation, what international cooperation could actually be looking like. In Latin America specifically, we have a regional higher education conference that happens every 10 years. And we have had just one follow-up happen in Brasília, Brazil in March of this year. Something that was highlighted at this conference was actually on regional integration and regional solidarity. So I think that tapping into these structures, because there are structures to follow up these kind of programs, not only the SDG 4 Latin American element, which exists, there's a coordination mechanism at UNESCO that UNESCO coordinates in Latin America and as well in other regions. But you also have this one linked to the higher education conference. You have the Mercosul structure, for example. So I think that we could strategize around identifying structures of international and regional cooperation to bring these kind of solidarity programs that are really much needed in the region where I'm coming from in the Americas.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Christian, could I ask you to share more about your work at DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Program?
Well, I guess you're mainly interested in my work regarding the Hilde Domain program because, well, to be very honest, DAAD as one of the largest, academic institutional exchange organizations worldwide is not mainly concerned really with the human dimension, let's say. It's usually focusing on academic performance and so on when it comes to granting scholarships. But a couple of years ago, let me tell, well, in 2015, when we had this large influx of Syrian refugees coming into Germany, I think we started to reconsider to a certain extent. And at that time, well, the German Minister of Foreign Affairs was saying, okay, we cannot really afford to lose the whole generation of people who are denied educational opportunities in Syria. So we started a large initiative of, at that time, about 220 scholarships for Syrians coming to Germany to complete the course of higher education. And that was very successful, I have to say. We just looked at the results. About 98% of the scholarship holders from Syria at that time who came to Germany performed brilliantly. Yeah. Most of them, I have to say, decided to stay in Germany afterwards because against our expectations, the war has not really ended, and there was no incentive of going back to Syria. But while they completed their careers in Germany, went on to do PhDs, joined the labor market, and so on. And at that time, we said, well, we should not really limit it to Syria. Yeah. And the idea was to create a worldwide program named after this German poet of Jewish faith, Hilde Dumin. And Hilde Dumin now is open for students in general who are denied educational opportunities. So we do not really, let's say, limit ourselves to student activism, which is also to a certain extent a little bit of the problem we are facing right now. And I'm going to explain what I mean by this. In the beginning, we had people coming from Belarus, for example, people who participated in demonstrations against the Lukashenko regime. They were student activists, and it was quite clear. We could really see they were in prison, they were in danger of landing in prison, so they came to Germany because they were really in danger. But what happened afterwards was, to be very honest, Afghanistan. Afghanistan, you know, the German government and DAD also has been very active in Afghanistan for the last 20 years. Then the Taliban came back, and of course all educational activities stopped, more or less, especially for women. So Hilde Dumin was facing this large demand, especially from female students from Afghanistan who were looking for educational opportunities. And they were not typical activists, but of course they were denied educational opportunities. So they applied to the program, and that's why right now the majority of people supported by Hilde Dumin is from Afghanistan, followed by Iran, by Belarus, to a certain extent activists, but generally mainly people who have no chance of completing higher education courses in their home country.
Yeah. That's a really interesting program, and I think a good example that we can look at if we're looking at, establishing relocation programs. I want to come back to this topic of the role of universities or higher education institutions, and I'm interested in this in the broader way that you frame, Camilla, that universities focus on research. It focuses on education, on training and teaching and, critical thinking. And there's also a citizenship role that universities play. We are a particular form of institution in society. And perhaps in some places under a lot of stress, political repression itself, but in other places also a very respected institution. So I'd just welcome your thoughts and reflections on, what is the role of universities in this bigger ecosystem of the protection of human rights defenders generally, but students in particular. Mm-hmm. So just any thoughts and reflections you have? Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for that question. Definitely, we do look at the universities really as allies, but also we need to engage them because, in fact, it is very striking that repression often does come from the universities themselves, right, either actively or through a lack of procedures, let's say, like an absence of procedures. So I will exemplify. Firstly, when Hector was mentioning this morning the example of Honduras, unfortunately, it is in the Americas. This is widespread, and it's happening in different under different regimes. I'm coming, as I said, from Brazil, and just recently, last month, are we already in October, in September? But in the State University of Rio de Janeiro, the rector of that university really cracked down on the students, huge student repression, because the students were requesting for scholarships, maintenance scholarships for students who do not have much resources. They need these scholarships, and there was a crackdown because they were protesting for that. In Costa Rica, we've just had now a protest coming because there was mobilization around increasing funds for the university, and actually the crackdown came with a dehumanizing language, which is also a common denominator, saying, who are the rats who are asking for additional money? And this was coming also from the heads of the universities. And so this is on the one hand. And on the other hand, when I talk about absence, and something that the coalition is dealing with, is actually the idea of establishing protocols to avoid, protect, and then overcome, when it happens, different forms of violence, particularly related to academic freedom in our case. And I do want to mention that a huge type of violence that is occurring in the university setting that CAFA has been observing and registering, and we are receiving instances, is around gender violence. And gender violence that is affecting students, gender violence that affects the workers, the female workers, the administrative workers as well, and also the professors, women professors. And the crackdowns that are happening, colleagues, is just really astonishing, and something that, from my perspective, should be taken to CEDAW and other commissions such as CEDAW and human rights commissions. So we are working in these, there are two elements that we should be working with when we look at universities. One is the creation of protocols to avoid crackdowns and to have protocols in place in terms of how to find a dialogued solution to conflict, which is part of democracy, on the one hand. And on the other hand, really, there has to be more awareness raising around criminalization against students, and there has to be, like red lines, and us really leaning into legislation, leaning into the international principles, leaning into the inter-American principles, leaning into the reports like Farida's report, the UN Special Rapporteur for the Right to Education. I counted how many times the word student appeared, 72 times, which means it is highly, highly recognized in Farida's report that academic freedom is absolutely related to students and students' rights, right? The students are a central element of Farida's report, as they are inter-American principles and the international principles. So we really need to lean into these and liaise with the universities and make them understand as well that they are allies, and we want them to be allies, but that they need to abide by the principles that are being established in terms of protection of human rights.
I think those are really good points, Camilla. Thank you.
Yeah.
Washington?
Sure. And, universities are a key actor, a critical enabler in the human rights ecosystem and value chain. When I was speaking about what we do as Southern Defenders, I posited that we provide holistic protection support. What do I mean by holistic protection support? We provide digital security, physical security, psychosocial support, but one more critical element is the economic security. So how do you situate and locate the role of universities, especially in the protection continuum? But at the extreme, at the end of the protection continuum is external relocation, when you move to Norway, to Germany to study. And now, for us to secure economic security, we need to add value to the lives of activists. And once you secure your education, and like if I were to quote Nelson Mandela, education is the weapon for development. So it shows that we are now dealing with other elements post-education, the future post-student at risk program, which is more fundamental, because I've always believed in the philosophy that you must begin with the end in mind. The students are here. What will happen tomorrow when they leave these spaces? Because what I've learned in protection work, if you provide support to an HRD at risk or a student at risk for the first time, they will appreciate it. So when you gave them the scholarships to study, they are really appreciating it. I was talking to them last night. I've been talking to them. If you give support for the second time, you create dependence, what we call dependence syndrome. And if you give support for the third time, you create entitlement. So you must always begin with an end in mind, an exit strategy. So I would want us to create some strategic networks within the broader ecosystem, working with civic society organizations in our home countries, so that when students studying here wants to do their internships and so forth and so on, we create those value chains with organizations, with institutions back home, so that we manage the transition post this program. And again, universities are sites of the struggle. So they provide this ultra-safe space for students to be safe but not silent, to always be able to continue to speak truth to those in power as well as those who want to be in power. That's how we can build a rights-respecting democratic society. So universities play a consequential role with regards to building resilience and prosperity within the broader human rights space. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, please go ahead.
Perhaps just an observation from the German perspective.
Yeah.
You know, academic freedom plays a very central role in the German constitution. It's guaranteed by the constitution and so on. And my observation is that German universities tend to go the extra mile when it comes to protecting and granting academic freedom. But here comes the but. Yeah? As you can see with the current demonstrations and so on regarding the war in Gaza, yeah? Well, it can put us as a funding organization as well as the German government in a difficult position. Where does academic freedom end? Yeah? Because, well, according to the German penal code, there are certain things you are not allowed to do, yeah? Regarding anti-Semitism, denying Israel's rights to exist, and so on. And of course, students will claim it's academic freedom, what I'm saying. Yeah? So we are facing a little bit of a difficult time, and I'm sure it's the same in many other countries, in Europe at least, and in the United States. But as I said, in general, German universities do take it very seriously, and also when it comes to participating, for example, in the Hilde Domain program. Because what we do is, well, we provide the framework and the funding, but in the end, it's the German universities doing the nominations. They know the people, they nominate, and they try to make clear why those people need protection. Yeah? And in the end, they will also accept those students, yeah, as master students, as PhD students. And I think that's an interesting particular feature of our program. We have an obligatory side program all students need to take. So let's say there's somebody doing engineering, yeah, but he or she will also have to participate in a 2-semester program regarding topics like good governance, civil society, and so on, which is also taught on an academic level, partly virtually, but partly also on site. Yeah? And we have made a very, very good experience with this, because what we believe is we are trying to educate future leaders and also future human rights defenders. People are coming from this perspective, but I guess there's something we can do from the academic side also to, let's say, enhance this thing, so people have a chance to be even better qualified to continue this line of work afterwards.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting, and all of the suggestions that you've made and the observations that you've had really makes me think about really, you know, the universities that we have in our societies. They can be repressive institutions, or they can be giving freedom, they can be liberating institutions, but that really depends on the people within the institutions, it depends on the academics, it depends on the administrators, it depends on, the people running the show. And I think why students at universities come under a lot of pressure is because it's a space for imagination. It's a place where you can imagine the world you want and to criticize the world that exists. It's a space to ask questions. But then you realize that actually asking questions is about asking who's in power. And the very act of asking a question can also reveal power relations. And sometimes those power relations really need to be shaken up, So I think universities are a space of possibility, but also a place for repression. It's a place that can be enabling, as you say, a space to question what exists, but hopefully in a way that enables all of us to make a better world, not just to retain a world that is dysfunctional. But thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts. Camilla, do you want to go ahead?
Please. Yeah. I wanted to end on, I wanted to highlight a few ideas still, if that's okay. First, I do think that I want to end on a note that universities are pillars of democracy, and our struggle is to make them, actually fulfill that mandate, let's say, right? And they definitely are spaces of knowledge production, of debate, of critical thinking, of emancipation, and we need to make sure that we have the mechanisms in place so that that mission can be fulfilled. I did want to mention that in the Americas, the issue of university autonomy is a fundamental one. Pertaining to financial autonomy, pertaining to pedagogical autonomy, and the censorship that we have seen happening in different parts of the continent, particularly related to race and gender, for example, to name but two. And also the issue of management. So sometimes the state interfering and actually electing the rectors instead of it being the community. So I just wanted to share that these are problematics. And of course, mention the problematics that we are facing. I've mentioned Brazil, I mentioned Costa Rica, but we obviously need to mention what is happening in Venezuela and in Nicaragua and express our solidarity to the extreme situations that take place in those countries. Also in Argentina, where we have an immense crackdown and a complete delegitimization of the entire education system, including the universities, a total definanciation of the higher education system, of research as well, and also an instrumentalization of students that are invited to that are actually incentivized to tell on their teachers with a 0800 line. So this idea of really putting the education actors one against the other and of instrumentalizing the students to act in that way is very perverse. And I do think that we should take forward this specific problematics of instrumentalization of students using the principles and the international mechanisms that we have at hand.
Christian and Washington, I wonder whether you have any last thought to share on
Well,
universities.
what I would like to share is, after everything I've heard today about the initiatives here in Norway, and we know there are some other countries trying to establish similar programs. What we need to do, and I've been talking about this for the last 5 years or so, we need some kind of better coordinating mechanism for our programs. Because even on the German level, there are similar initiatives. For example, we have a sister organization who is more or less working in supporting scholars at risk, like you do have in Norway as well. So, and even between the two organizations in Germany, coordinating is not so easy. And then, let's say, come to the European level. Getting much more difficult. But there is so much we could gain from a closer exchange. There are cases we can pass on to partners. Data protection and so on is always a difficulty, I know, but in general there's a chance and we should try to use it. Well, the European Union now is really starting to wake up, which is a good sign. For example, they are now funding a new program for scholars at risk, including PhD students. DID will be the implementing agency together with some European partners, and the EU will be spending 12 million euros for the first 4 years, which is a good beginning. But here again, we need to coordinate somehow, and I would be so grateful if that is also a sign we can give here today on this topic, on this panel, how we can achieve better coordinating mechanisms. Highly needed.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Washington?
Yeah, and to piggyback on these submissions, I think institutions of higher learning, universities, must be deliberate and intentional in imagining or reimagining and surfacing their role as protection shields for students at risk, human rights defenders at risk. And they need to be ambassadors as they interface with other institutions of higher learning within their spaces, so that we've got more institutions coming forward to act as first line of defense for students and human rights defenders, especially women human rights or female students at high and immediate risk. And also, as a parting shot, just to thank Sai and everyone involved in this amazing work. I think you deserve a round of applause.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I think you've given us a lot to think about in terms of imagining the role of universities and reminding us that universities can be a repressive force, but can also be an enabling and creative force for human rights and social justice. So thank you.
Thank you.
I would like now to invite on stage Amir Aman Chiaro. Just give him a warm welcome. Amir is another student that arrived in Norway in 2015 through Students at Risk. He is an award-winning journalist known for his work covering conflict and political development in Ethiopia. For over 3 years, he has reported for the Associated Press. Despite facing significant challenges, including imprisonment, Amir remains a tireless advocate for press freedom. Currently, he is a guest of the Hamburg Foundation for Politically Persecuted People and continues his work from Germany. Once again, please let's give him a big round of applause. So we're lucky today to also have you for a mini interview, Amir.
It's a pleasure.
So I'll start with the same question I did to Said, and is what were you doing 10 years ago or before 2015 when you came through STAR?
So I came here in 2015, as you have already mentioned. And prior to that, I was engaged in some sort of activism work. I was young that days, but you know, even since high school, I was engaged in some movements that are pro-democracy, pro-freedom. And at the age of 15, probably when I was in high school, I was expelled from school for 1 year. I was arrested and I was beaten up, you know, so it was tough. But I continued my work for freedom, democracy, you know, and for peaceful coexistence between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Back then, they were not in good terms. So that's, I continued that even after I joined university. And, but of course, it came with its own risk. And I heard that there was this opportunity through one of my former professors. I was very much excited, and I ended up in Norway. It's like almost 9 years ago.
Yeah, but you had heard about Norway before.
No. I've heard. I mean, the name was familiar, but you know, the time I came to Norway, I didn't even have a close proximity with a plane. So it was the first time when I was even on board. So it was all a surprise, you know, big country, different people, different weather, different culture. So it's everything was, not everything, but a lot of things were different. Yeah.
And what has happened after you were done with your studies and you return back home?
Yes. So I tried to continue my work in activism, even from here, from Norway. But I was mostly involved with the works of Sai, and I was very much excited to travel around the country, give some speech about the political development of Ethiopia, meeting nice people and all. And I completed my master's degree in global journalism in Kristiansand in 2018. But the time that I completed my studies was also time there was when a lot of big things were happening in Ethiopia. We had, the former regime, or at least, prime minister was replaced by a new prime minister, and for him to come to power, students have played an enormous role, continuously protesting for over 3 to 5 years. So I was very much excited and went back home, and yes, so I then started working, including journalism. Yes.
Yeah. And what would you say once you were back home? How do you see the impact of the Students at Risk program then in your journalism career and everything that has happened since?
So this is what I usually say to people when they ask me how has it influenced you. And I say I was born and raised in Ethiopia, but I was shaped a lot in Germany. I mean, in Norway. I'm now living in Germany. It's my young days, and I was meeting a lot of people, intellectuals, activists, and they were very much contributing to the person who I am today. So I had grown a lot as a person by the time I was returning to Ethiopia. And a lot of ideals were also instilled in me, and I was also able to create networks, meet people, international people from all over the world, and was also in touch with Saiho and all. So it really broadened my spectrum, I would say, and it had really gave me an enormous opportunity. So, and also, I was arrested in Ethiopia after I left Norway.
I was going to ask you about that. So just some years ago, months, there was this campaign, right, around your case because you were arrested. So maybe if you want to share a little bit about what happened and what did you experience?
So I left Norway. We were all hopeful about the change that was going on in Ethiopia. Even the prime minister there, he tried to bring Ethiopia and Eritrea together, and even won a Nobel Peace Prize award. And unfortunately, is one of the guys who is at the forefront of leading the country into chaos and more fighting now. So, but we were all hopeful, And I also started doing journalism, working with the foreign media and all. And so unfortunately there was this big war, which I think is one of the bloodiest wars since Second World War. And going to the battlefield, covering the war, meeting victims, talking to rebels, and all documenting the war, because there was this communication blackout. The government was trying to make sure that nothing would come out of Ethiopia. But, regardless, I tried my best, and so they had no idea who was really behind all these stories until they found out eventually. So I was arrested and labeled as a terrorist, and they broadcasted a documentary on at least 3 state TV stations. The radios were also talking a lot, saying that I'm a traitor, a terrorist, and all, that I'm going to face up to minimum 15 years imprisonment. And so then, Saiho, I also would like to thank you for because it's been really a great honor, because Saiho was leading a campaign, and a lot of activists were really, they joined the campaign, and so it really made an impact to my release. So the interrogators were sitting there, the police, they were treating me like a terrorist, and but they were also seeing all these campaigns online, and they were not sure if you all are also terrorists who are supporting this. And it's like, but there's like, you know, this guy is not easy, you know. So it was a really great honor for me. It's not about whether it brought any change or not, whether it impacted my release or not, but you know, showing solidarity has been very, very helpful. You know, and also it made the officials realize that you know there are also other people who are not necessarily Ethiopians but want Ethiopia to to respect freedom of speech. Yeah.
And there was also support from other countries and other places.
Yeah, from the US and UK, mainly the US, you know, and international media. So they were really supporting and campaigning for my release. Yeah.
Was there a missing link in the support from the Norwegian side?
I mean, I'm trying to balance being grateful and also, you know, some level of disappointment. But that's because I think the embassy or the government of Norway in general hasn't been really actively engaging with me. It's not like they owe me anything, but it was mainly Thai people who were actively campaigning for my release. But Norway, as a government, as an embassy, when I was arrested or even after I was released, they disappeared. They were nowhere to be found. Yeah. So that was a little disappointing. But I don't know, there could be some political reasons, or I have no idea, but I think it's really good to follow what the STAR students who have completed their studies and went back home, what they are doing, and whenever they face some troubles. It's good also to show some solidarity, you know. And in my case, that was not the case, because Norway, even after I was returned, I'm going to complain, I'm sorry, but it would be nice if the foreign minister was here. But I applied for a visa, because there was this television production thing going on about Ethiopians in Norway. So I was hoping to come here, do some stories, and go back. I was denied a visa. I was like, I studied in Norway, you know, what are you saying? I appealed and they said, no, I'm sorry, but you are single and you don't seem to have enough financial status. But then few months after, without anything changed, I applied to a visa to the US. I got one. To Austria, I got one. To France, I got one. Now I'm in Germany. But Norway is like, oh, you know. So I think in that way, it shouldn't only be about bringing, you know, students to Norway and helping them. It should also be making sure that they continue their work safe, you know. It's about standing up for your ideals, you know. It's not necessarily about the individuals, I guess. Yes.
Thanks a lot for sharing. Yeah, probably it was a mistake, because we all heard the Minister of Foreign Affairs saying how proud they are about the program.
Please stay there.
There was some miscommunication there. But just to finish then, support network, visa issues, these are things that keep coming up. But I know that we also have some new STAR students among us in this room. So I just want maybe to hear from you one advice that you would give to these new students that are coming to Norway in this new journey for them.
Maybe not one, but I think
several.
You know what? I think this opportunity is a golden opportunity for students who were at risk back home, and it's not easy to really find an opportunity like this. If, for instance, in the Ethiopian case, most of the students who have been protesting and all sacrificing their education, some of them even their lives, you know, did not really get this chance. And now in Ethiopia, for instance, 3/4, at least in some regions, 3/4 of students are not even going to school because there is a continuous armed conflict going on. So imagine you coming here. It's a privilege, honestly. And I think you don't have to take this for granted. It's a great opportunity for you. So don't take it for granted. And it's also good to be in touch with SAIHO, to network with people, to establish contacts, because at the end of the day, They will help you in many ways. In my case, help me for my release in some ways. So it's good to be in touch and to benefit from Norway as much as they can. Yeah, that would be my advice, I guess.
Thanks a lot, Amir.
Okay, thank you.
As we reach the end of today's program, I would like to invite one last person on stage. Cecilia Beilet is the UN Independent Expert on Human Rights and International Solidarity. She is also professor at the University of Oslo, and we are honored to have her with us to do the closing reflections of this event. Please give her a warm welcome.
Happy birthday, Sai. I can't believe the quality of this report. I hope everybody here reads it and disseminates it. It is brilliance. So I was going to show you a slide. Espen Barth Eide, our beloved Minister of Foreign Affairs, who brings such honor to this country, always on the right side. He said, to look across is good. And I guess this is a take on the prior characteristic we have. Det er typisk norsk å være god, ikke sant? So det er typisk norsk to look across, ikke sant? And Norway has had a history of a foreign policy based on the principle of solidarity shared with Sweden and Denmark and Finland and Iceland. The Nordics lead on solidarity approaches to enabling marginalized people around the world to emancipate themselves, to have the right to have rights. And that's what solidarity is about. It's a transformative empathy. So 1968, the minister referred to France, but my parents were students in Argentina. And they protested against the military dictatorship. I was going to show you a picture of that. They were allowed to go to the United States because they had graduated from medical school as doctors. And the United States was at war in Vietnam and needed doctors desperately. So the United States was inviting doctors from all over the world to come and live the American dream, which they did. I was allowed in the United States as the child of student activists to go to school, to go to university, to become a lawyer. I then migrated to Norway, where Norway allowed me to enter the PhD program, get the PhD, and today I am a professor of international law at the University of Oslo, which I'm very grateful for, and I also try to serve with honor. I have French students and German students who take my public international law class and thank me because I give them the space to talk openly about Gaza. I never restrict them. We have openness at this university, and I think it's a fine thing. So the way forward from what we've learned today, it's very easy. 20 per year, come on, we can do better. I think we should approach the parliamentarians who unfortunately are not here because they're opening their house today. We need to schedule meetings immediately, and if Germany can give 220 spots to Syrians alone, we definitely can do better. I really challenge us to up the numbers as soon as we can. And I think we should lead. I think our rector has been exceptional in leading at a variety of different initiatives with different universities. I think he should contact our colleagues in the other Nordic countries and create some sort of Nordic committee for solidarity in relation to students and to student activisms, and it should come from us because it's definitely not going to come from the Trump administration if they're elected. You know it's the opposite. You will see even more deportations. And that brings another issue that many of the presentations focused on our need to help students in authoritarian countries. But you're seeing students who come from the South that are in the North, and they are engaging and therefore are being subject to deportation and expulsion. Those students have to be identified, and we have to help them even if they're not coming from their original country. If they are in the North, we should go north-north solidarity for those students from the South. The other point I'd like to make, how many students of mine from refugee law are here? Anybody? Okay, great. So, yay. Okay, so you remember the definition of a refugee is persecution, right? According to your race, religion, nationality, social group, and political opinion. So a student human rights defender just shouted out, which category do they fall under? Students? Political opinion, right? They are the classic refugee, actually. They also fall under social group because human rights defenders are a social group, right? So what this means is that all of our focus on temporary protection initiatives is actually undercutting their right to seek asylum. They have a right to apply for full refugee status, and we also need to engage with the UDI and the UNE to have a review of the cases to see how many of them can be lifted to refugee status. I think that to only focus on temporary protection is a false focus. Plus, there was emphasis on many of them identifying with LGBT and gender women's issues. Those are also additional categories I could give grounding for their finding of a refugee claim. And finally, here at the University of Oslo, we are creating an international solidarity map. And we will publicize this in New York at the General Assembly, where we will show, among others, all the NGOs that are working to create a better world. And this is a counter to the hundreds of political violence maps that shows you the destruction around the world. We are creating an international solidarity map which will show you who is trying to establish networks to give visibility to people who are working for peace and human rights and protection of the environment. And I think that this type of initiative seeks to change the picture so that we're not just devastated by constant barrage of initiatives that are focusing on a vision of the world as polarized and fragmented. There are much more connections and much more networks among us than dividing us. And I think what we need to do is just pivot in that direction. So I hope that these suggestions that I'm making can be taken by those of you who are policymakers and practitioners. And I welcome the opportunity in my UN mandate to give further opportunities for voice and spreading the message of the work that you do here in this institution, because I do believe it is solidarity in practice. So congratulations to all of you.
Thanks, Cecilia. We have now reached the end of today's program. And on behalf of everyone involved in organizing this event and everyone that has been involved with the Students at Risk program throughout all these 10 years, I want to thank you for joining us both here physically in Oslo and also online. So just before we close the live stream, I would like to share one final message. As we head home today, I want everyone to remember that there is still much to be done. Education is not a magical tool that will change the world, but critical, good education changes people. And as Students at Risk has shown us, it is those people who will go out and change the world. Thank you. And now some boring practical information. Food in the room next door, drinks by the end.